Alicia Morgan stepped into the towering glass doors of Northwestern National Bank, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. Heads turned as she walked with purpose, dressed impeccably in a tailored cream-colored suit, her long, dark hair falling in smooth waves over her shoulders. Alicia felt a familiar surge of pride, a reminder of how far she'd come and how much she was about to accomplish. At the reception desk, she introduced herself. "Good morning. I'm Alicia Morgan. I have a 9:30 appointment with Mr. Peterson." The receptionist looked her over, eyes scanning her from head to toe before finally nodding, barely masking the hint of surprise in her expression. "Right? Mr. Peterson's office is at the end of the hall. He'll be with you shortly." As she waited, Alicia went over her plans in her head. She'd brought everything: the meticulously prepared documents, a 5-year business forecast, and all the numbers to show just how profitable her expansion would be. This loan was more than just money. It was the key to scaling her business and breaking through the ceiling she had hit with her current resources. When Mr. Peterson finally appeared, she straightened. He approached with an air of indifference, barely glancing up as he extended a hand. "Miss Morgan, was it?" "Yes, that's right. Alicia Morgan." She offered her hand confidently, but he didn't make eye contact, his gaze focused on something distant over her shoulder as he led her into his office. "Take a seat," he said briskly, gesturing to the chair across from his massive desk as he settled behind it. She could feel the chill in his tone, his posture, his sidelong glances. He wasted no time with pleasantries. "So," he began, flipping open her file with an exaggerated sigh, "you're looking for a substantial loan for what kind of business was it again?" Alicia stilled, her jaw tightening at the question. "It's a skincare brand I founded 6 years ago. We're now serving over 10,000 customers with strong quarterly growth. I have a detailed financial summary right here that outlines." He raised a hand to stop her, barely glancing at the documents she held out. "I'll look over what I need to," he said dismissively. "What kind of assets do you have, Miss Morgan? You do realize a loan of this size requires collateral." "Of course. I brought detailed documents outlining my business assets as well as personal assets," she replied, keeping her voice steady, determined not to let his tone shake her. "My business generates enough monthly revenue to more than cover the repayment terms." He gave a thin smile, leaning back and crossing his arms. "Monthly revenue? That's not exactly something we can rely on for a loan of this caliber. We tend to prioritize clients with a stronger, how shall I put it, financial background." Alicia felt a sting, but her voice remained level. "If you check my records, you'll see that my credit is excellent, and my assets have been valuated to meet." "Miss Morgan," he interrupted, looking her squarely in the eye for the first time, and she caught a glint of something disdainful in his gaze. "Let's be practical. Banks like ours don't take on high-risk borrowers, especially those who haven't, well, established a traditional portfolio." Her fingers tightened around the stack of documents in her lap. High risk? Traditional portfolio? She had every paper, every record, every proof to show she was as creditworthy as any other applicant. But something in his gaze told her that wasn't the problem. "Mr. Peterson, with all due respect, my business is in excellent standing," she said, leaning forward. "The growth we've achieved in 6 years has been significant, and I've been profitable since year 2. I'm confident that if you examine my proposal, you'll see that I'm more than qualified for her." He held up a hand again, his lips twisting in a faint smirk. "Miss Morgan, you need to understand how these things work. Expansion can be risky. We can't just hand out loans based on hopeful forecasts and budding brands." Alicia's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. She wouldn't let his dismissive attitude get to her. "I understand the risks involved, Mr. Peterson, but with the collateral I've presented and my financial track record, I believe." "Belief isn't enough here, Miss Morgan," he cut her off. "This isn't a family investment. This is a bank. We're dealing with serious money here." There was finally laid bare. He wasn't interested in her business proposal, her success, or her growth trajectory. To him, she was just another unworthy applicant with ambitious dreams that he felt no obligation to take seriously. She took a steadying breath. Mr. Peterson, if I may, I've worked incredibly hard to reach this point. All I ask is that you look at the numbers, the stability of my revenue, and the assets I'm presenting. He shook his head slowly, already looking down at her file, as if dismissing her entirely. Miss Morgan, he said, voice laced with a barely concealed condescension, we have a certain level of clientele we prioritize. You may want to consider a different institution, perhaps something better suited to smaller, emerging businesses. Alicia sat there, swallowing the rising tide of anger and frustration. She could see he had no intention of even considering her proposal. She thought of standing up, of demanding he show her respect, but the cold, mocking smirk on his face only reminded her of what she was truly up against. I see, she managed, her voice tight. Thank you for your time. With as much dignity as she could muster, Alicia stood, gathered her documents, and walked out of his office. She felt every dismissive glance from the bank staff on her way out, as though the rejection had already been broadcast through every hallway. Outside, she stood for a moment, letting the cold city air calm her racing pulse. She had been humiliated, but something within her wouldn't let the moment end here. Outside the bank, Alicia took a deep breath, letting the crisp air cool her face as she replayed the painful meeting with Peterson. Her mind was a whirl of thoughts, emotions shifting from humiliation to defiance. She couldn't shake the look in his eyes, the disdain, the smugness, the casual cruelty. His tone, so patronizing, as if she should have known better than to even walk in there. Determined not to let him have the last word, she called her close friend and business mentor, Marcus Wright, a successful entrepreneur who had been through his own battles with gatekeepers like Peterson. Marcus, you busy? She asked, trying to steady her voice as she walked briskly down the street. Never too busy for you, Alicia. What's going on? He replied, picking up on her strained tone right away. She explained the meeting, detailing the subtle insults, the way Peterson had dismissed her every word, and the sting of his condescending advice to find another institution. There was a silence on the other end before Marcus finally spoke, his voice hardening. You know, this isn't the first time I've heard about Peterson doing this. Other business owners, black business owners, have had a rough time with him too. Alicia stopped in her tracks. You're kidding. You think he does this to everyone? Not everyone, Alicia. Just people like us. He's got a reputation, but no one's gone far enough to challenge him on it. Most people just get fed up and leave. The weight of his words hit her. She felt anger seething beneath the hurt, but it gave her a renewed sense of resolve. He thinks he can get away with it because no one stood up to him. Maybe it's time someone does. Marcus chuckled, though it held no humor. I'd say it's about time. And Alicia, if there's anyone who can do it, it's you. But don't go in there unarmed. You got the records, the assets. Make sure you've got allies. Make some noise. Encouraged by Marcus's words, Alicia spent the next few days reaching out to other business contacts. Her instincts had been right. Marcus wasn't the only one with a story. She heard from black entrepreneurs who had sat through eerily similar meetings with Peterson, each detailing the same indifferent tone, the same veiled dismissals. As she listened to each of their stories, her anger crystallized into a sense of purpose. With each conversation, Alicia compiled notes, piecing together a growing pattern of prejudice that Peterson had seemingly wielded unchecked. She reached out to Samantha Ellis, a fellow entrepreneur and owner of a successful fitness studio, who had approached Peterson for a loan a few months earlier. Samantha had walked out with nothing but frustration. Alicia, he didn't even pretend to consider my proposal, Samantha confided. I thought maybe my pitch wasn't strong enough, but hearing your story, it's like I'm reliving my own meeting with him. Alicia nodded, feeling her resolve strengthen. We need to make sure no one else goes through this. I think if enough of us speak up, the bank will have to take it seriously. Over the weekend, Alicia worked tirelessly, combing through her business records and financial forecasts, reviewing every document to make sure she had everything in line. She knew that confronting Peterson again wouldn't be easy, but this time, she wouldn't be walking in alone. She planned to escalate the situation to someone who couldn't ignore her, the bank CEO, Mr. Caldwell. When Monday arrived, Alicia entered the bank with her head high, carrying a new level of determination in her stride. She asked to speak with the CEO's assistant, requesting a meeting with Mr. Caldwell, citing a matter of urgency. The assistant, Mrs. Henderson, glanced up with a skeptical frown. "Mr. Caldwell is a very busy man, Ms. Morgan. Can you give me more details on the nature of your request?" Alicia's tone was calm but firm. "This concerns an experience of potential discrimination involving Mr. Peterson. I believe Mr. Caldwell would be very interested in what I have to say, as I also have multiple accounts from other business owners with similar encounters." Mrs. Henderson's face froze for a split second, but she quickly regained her composure. "One moment, Ms. Morgan." She picked up the phone and dialed Mr. Caldwell's office, her eyes never leaving Alicia as she spoke in a hushed tone. Alicia could feel the unease that Mrs. Henderson tried to mask. After a few tense moments, she hung up and nodded at Alicia. "Mr. Caldwell can see you in 15 minutes. Please have a seat." Alicia thanked her, settling into one of the leather chairs in the waiting area. The air was thick with anticipation. She felt her heart racing, a strange mix of nerves and anger pulsing through her. But she reminded herself that this wasn't just about her. It was about all the others who had faced similar treatment. When Mrs. Henderson finally led her into Mr. Caldwell's office, Alicia took in the surroundings. A spacious room with sleek, dark furniture, walls lined with framed certificates and accolades. Mr. Caldwell, a silver-haired man with an imposing yet thoughtful air, rose from behind his desk and extended his hand. "Ms. Morgan, welcome. I understand you have some concerns about our lending practices." She looked him square in the eyes, feeling the weight of her purpose behind her words. "Yes, Mr. Caldwell. I'm here to address a pattern of discrimination within your bank, specifically linked to Mr. Peterson. I believe my experience isn't isolated, and I have accounts from other entrepreneurs who have encountered similar treatment." Mr. Caldwell's expression shifted, a flicker of discomfort passing over his face. He sat back, gesturing for her to continue. "I see. Go on, Ms. Morgan." With a steady voice, Alicia began detailing her experience, laying out each specific instance where Peterson had disregarded her financial proof, dismissed her assets, and reduced her proposal to nothing more than risky hopes. She handed over copies of the accounts she had gathered, watching as Caldwell's face grew more somber with each page. By the end, there was no denying the impact. Alicia could see it in his face, a dawning realization that this wasn't just a complaint. It was an indictment of something far more systemic. Mr. Caldwell remained silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of Alicia's accusations as he scanned the pages in front of him. The stillness in the room was almost suffocating, but Alicia held her ground, refusing to be intimidated. Finally, Caldwell looked up, a hard expression settling across his features. "Ms. Morgan," he began, his voice measured, "I'd like to thank you for bringing this to my attention. These are serious allegations, and if there's any truth to them, they could suggest a profound failure of our core values." Alicia leaned forward slightly, seizing the opportunity. "With respect, Mr. Caldwell, the truth is clear. The facts are in those accounts, and you're holding them right now. It's not just about one loan officer's personal bias. It's about the people and businesses who have been set back because of that bias, because of your bank's bias." Caldwell's face remained unreadable, but he nodded slowly. "I will conduct a formal review of Mr. Peterson's loan decisions and these specific cases you've brought forward." He cleared his throat, the formality almost slipping for a moment. "In the meantime, I'd like to extend an invitation for you to reapply for your loan, personally approved by me." Alicia forced herself not to react too quickly, the gesture feeling almost too little, too late. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell, but I didn't come here just for a loan. I came here because no one should have to go through what I went through." Her voice remained calm, but edged with intensity. "This isn't just a personal inconvenience, sir. This is about respect and equality." Caldwell straightened, adjusting his tie as he seemed to realize Alicia was not easily pacified. "Understood, Ms. Morgan. We'll review this thoroughly. You have my word on that." Leaving Caldwell's office, Alicia's determination only grew. She refused to let a temporary victory silence her, and so she followed up on her meeting with a call to the board, requesting a conversation directly with her father, Mr. Morgan, the chairman. She knew this was a risky move, and while she and her father were close, their relationship had always kept professional boundaries in place. Her heart raced as she dialed his direct line, rehearsing what she would say. Her father's voice came over the line, warm yet surprised. "Alicia, what a surprise! To what do I owe this call?" "Dad," she began, her tone tinged with emotion she hadn't quite expected. "There's something I need to talk to you about. It's about the bank." A pause on the line, then he spoke carefully. "What's going on, sweetheart?" Taking a deep breath, Alicia relayed the details of her encounter with Peterson, her voice trembling only slightly as she recounted his dismissive attitude and the pattern of discrimination she had uncovered. There was silence on the line as she finished, her father's silence heavy. When he finally spoke, there was a rare hint of disappointment in his voice. "I can't believe this is happening within my own institution. That Peterson would treat anyone you this way." Alicia nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "I know, Dad. I know. And it's not just me. There are others, too. And they've all had similar experiences." She could almost hear the tension in his voice as he responded. "Thank you for telling me, Alicia. I'll address this with the board personally. You deserve that respect, and so does every other entrepreneur who comes through our doors." The conversation ended with her father promising swift action, and Alicia felt a glimmer of relief. But the real test was still to come. She wasn't sure if her father's intervention alone could ensure change. She needed assurance that this wasn't just about her, that the bank would commit to a lasting reform. A few days later, Alicia received a call from Mr. Caldwell's office, informing her of a scheduled board meeting to discuss her claims. She wasn't just being invited. She was encouraged to share her experience firsthand. The gesture was unusual, but affirming. She felt a quiet thrill of vindication. On the day of the meeting, she entered the boardroom, shoulders squared and head high. The room was filled with senior executives, including her father, Mr. Caldwell, and, to her surprise, Mr. Peterson himself, sitting at the far end of the table, visibly uncomfortable. As Alicia took her seat, Caldwell cleared his throat. "Ms. Morgan, thank you for joining us today. We're here to listen to your experience, your observations, and your recommendations for how we can address and, ideally, prevent this kind of bias moving forward." Alicia took a steadying breath, and then she began. "When I came to this bank, I brought with me a record of success, a proven business, and all the documentation to demonstrate my financial standing." She glanced at Peterson, noting his clenched jaw, then continued. "Yet I was treated as though my proposal had no merit, dismissed with almost no review of my records. And I'm not the only one who's had this experience." She detailed each case she had gathered, her voice unwavering as she painted a clear picture of the discrimination that had affected multiple Black entrepreneurs. Her father's expression grew increasingly somber, while Caldwell listened intently, nodding now and then. Finally, Peterson broke his silence. "With all due respect, Ms. Morgan," he said, his voice strained, "loan approvals aren't always personal. There are policies, standards that have to be maintained." Alicia met his gaze squarely. "Standards are one thing, Mr. Peterson. Bias is another. I didn't just bring in numbers. I brought in stability, a track record. Yet, you dismissed me and these others as if we had nothing to offer. Why?" Peterson shifted uncomfortably, unable to respond. Caldwell cut in, his tone sharp. "Mr. Peterson, Ms. Morgan's accounts show a pattern of bias. And with your approval record, I'm afraid the only conclusion we can draw is that you've applied these so-called standards unevenly." Peterson's face paled as Caldwell turned back to Alicia. "Ms. Morgan, I want to thank you for your honesty and courage in coming forward. We've scheduled an internal review of all loan decisions handled by Mr. Peterson, and it's our priority to ensure we address any discrimination within our policies and practices." Alicia nodded, but she wasn't finished. "If you really want to address this, Mr. Caldwell, then I suggest you make a commitment to support minority-owned businesses by not only adjusting policies, but also by creating avenues for entrepreneurs to access fair loans without prejudice. Her father finally spoke, his voice steady but stern as he addressed the room. I agree with Alicia. We need systemic change here, and it starts with accountability. If we value our customers, then we need to prove it, not just with words but with our actions. The room fell silent, each board member considering the weight of the statement. Alicia felt a profound sense of satisfaction. She knew she had made herself heard, and the real change had only just begun. Alicia left the boardroom with her head held high, a mix of relief and anticipation settling over her. She had finally been heard, and the board had agreed to conduct a comprehensive review of Mr. Peterson's past loan decisions. It was a victory, but there was still a lingering feeling that the fight wasn't over. The next morning, as Alicia opened her laptop to review some emails, a new message caught her eye. It was from Mr. Caldwell's office, formally notifying her of the internal review underway and thanking her for her contributions to what they called an important shift in the bank's practices. She allowed herself a small smile. Progress, however small, was still progress. A few hours later, while she was preparing for a business call, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and was surprised to see it was Mr. Peterson. Taking a deep breath, she accepted the call. This is Alicia. There was a pause, a hesitation on the other end. Ms. Morgan, it's Peterson. I wanted to reach out to you directly. I realized that our last meeting didn't go the way you'd hoped. His voice was formal, but she could hear a hint of discomfort beneath it. Is that what you'd call it, Mr. Peterson? She replied, her tone cold but controlled. A meeting that didn't go as hoped? Peterson cleared his throat awkwardly. Look, Ms. Morgan, I want to apologize if my approach came across as dismissive. It was never my intention to offend or undermine your proposal. Alicia felt a surge of frustration. Your approach didn't come across as anything, Mr. Peterson. It was dismissive, and it went beyond my proposal. You've done this to others, people who didn't have a platform to speak up. It's not about how it came across. It's about what you did. He was silent for a moment, likely unaccustomed to being challenged so directly. I understand that now, he finally said, though his tone remained stilted, lacking sincerity. I just wanted to make things right. Perhaps we could discuss how to move forward amicably. Alicia couldn't help but scoff. And by move forward, you mean me quietly accepting your apology, so this all goes away? His tone hardened slightly. I think we both know this doesn't have to be so public, Ms. Morgan. We're professionals here. Alicia paused, feeling a mixture of disbelief and anger. Mr. Peterson, I didn't come forward to keep things quiet. And if this situation has made you uncomfortable, maybe it's because you're finally experiencing a fraction of what you've put others through. You don't get to decide how I respond to your actions. She heard him exhale sharply, clearly frustrated, but he refrained from saying anything further. She ended the call with a sense of grim satisfaction, feeling no need to indulge him any further. The following day, Alicia received a follow-up email from Mr. Caldwell, inviting her to a company-wide announcement. The email stated that the bank would be taking significant steps to improve its lending policies and commitment to fair treatment. Curious and hopeful, Alicia decided to attend. In the grand atrium of the bank's headquarters, dozens of employees, executives, and board members gathered, and a buzz of anticipation filled the air. Alicia spotted Mr. Caldwell at the front of the room, along with a few other senior executives. To her surprise, Mr. Peterson was also there, looking distinctly uncomfortable as he hovered at the edge of the crowd. Mr. Caldwell stepped forward, clearing his throat as he adjusted his tie. Thank you all for coming. Today's meeting is a critical one for us. As many of you are aware, we've recently had a matter brought to our attention that has highlighted significant gaps in our lending policies. A murmur ran through the crowd as Caldwell continued, glancing meaningfully at Alicia. We've realized that our standards have, in some cases, allowed for unacceptable practices. This is not what we stand for. Starting today, the bank will implement a new set of guidelines and anti-bias training programs for all lending officers. Additionally, our review committee will be strengthened, ensuring all loan applications are handled with full transparency. He paused, letting his words sink in. Alicia watched as a mixture of surprise and approval spread across the faces in the room. But Mr. Caldwell wasn't done. Furthermore, Mr. Peterson has agreed to a reassignment to one of our smaller branches to reflect the seriousness of these issues, Caldwell added, his tone firm. Alicia felt a quiet satisfaction at this. It wasn't the complete accountability she had hoped for, but it was a start. Peterson's face reddened, though he managed to keep his composure as he nodded stiffly to the crowd. Alicia met his gaze briefly, and he looked away, clearly uncomfortable under the weight of her stare. After the meeting, as people began to disperse, Caldwell approached Alicia, offering her a small smile. "Thank you again, Ms. Morgan. I hope today shows our commitment to change." Alicia nodded. "It's a good first step, Mr. Caldwell, but I'll be watching to make sure it's more than just words." He chuckled, though there was a hint of respect in his eyes. "I have no doubt about that. We need people like you to keep us honest." As the crowd thinned, Alicia's father, Mr. Morgan, joined her, pride shining in his eyes. "You did well, Alicia. It's not easy to stand up and demand change, but you've done it." Alicia softened, giving him a grateful smile. "Thanks, Dad. I couldn't have done it without your support." They stood there, side by side, watching as the employees returned to their desks. Alicia felt a strange sense of peace, a weight lifting as the reality of the changes began to settle in. Just as she turned to leave, a woman approached her. Alicia recognized her as Samantha Ellis, the fitness studio owner who had shared her experience with Peterson. "Alicia," Samantha said, her face lighting up, "I just wanted to say thank you. You've given all of us a voice." Alicia took her hand, giving it a firm squeeze. "We all deserve to be treated with respect, Samantha. I'm glad you're here too." As Samantha walked away, Alicia realized that the ripple effect of her actions had already begun. For every entrepreneur who had been discouraged or dismissed, this moment marked a turning point. And as she walked out of the bank that day, Alicia felt her heart swell with pride. She had set out to expand her business, but she had achieved something far greater. She had opened a door for herself, for Samantha, and for every business owner who had been silenced. She'd made her mark, and there was no going back. In the weeks following the company-wide announcement, the effects of Alicia's courage began to ripple through the bank and beyond. News of the policy overhaul and Peterson's reassignment gained traction, with media outlets picking up the story of how one determined businesswoman had stood up against discrimination. Articles emerged detailing the bank's new policies, using Alicia's name as a symbol of strength and resilience. Alicia's business saw an immediate surge in support. New customers and investors, inspired by her story, reached out, expressing their admiration and offering partnerships. She became more than a business owner. She was now a beacon for those who had been made to feel small by people like Peterson. Her email inbox was flooded with messages from fellow entrepreneurs, people who had faced rejection, humiliation, and were now encouraged by her stand. One afternoon, Alicia was in her office, reviewing expansion plans that now seemed within reach, when her assistant, Julia, knocked and entered with an excited smile. "You've got another request to speak at a conference," Julia said, holding up a printed email. "This one's for the Women's Business Leadership Summit. They're asking you to give a keynote." Alicia looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. "The keynote? That's incredible." Julia nodded, grinning. "They mentioned how you're inspiring change in the industry. And honestly, who wouldn't want to hear from the woman who took on the board of Northwestern National Bank?" Alicia chuckled, the reality of her impact settling over her. "It's amazing, isn't it? I thought I'd lose more than I'd gain by speaking out." Her assistant nodded. "People were just waiting for someone like you to pave the way." Alicia accepted the invitation, feeling the significance of the opportunity. Her keynote speech became one of the most attended events at the summit, where she shared the entire story, from the frustration of that first meeting with Peterson to the ultimate victory of real change within the bank. Her words struck a chord, especially with women and minority business owners who, like her, had often been treated as though they didn't belong in certain spaces. After the conference, Alicia returned home, feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. Later that night, she received a call from her father. "Alicia," he said, his voice filled with pride, "I've been reading the articles about you. You've turned this into something far bigger than any of us could have imagined." "Thank you, Dad," she replied, her voice softening. "But honestly, it's not just about me. It's about all the people who never got a fair chance. We've started something, and I'm going to make sure it lasts." There was a pause, and then her father spoke again, his tone thoughtful. "You've brought something to light that a lot of us needed to see. I knew this bank needed to do better, but you showed me just how much." Their conversation left Alicia with a warm sense of accomplishment, one that was more than financial or professional. She had her father's respect and support, not just as a daughter, but as an advocate for change. In the following months, Northwestern National Bank launched a diversity-driven loan program aimed at minority and women-owned businesses. The initiative included mentorship opportunities, and Alicia was invited to serve as a board advisor to help guide the program, ensuring it stayed true to its mission. Meanwhile, Peterson had been transferred to a small, remote branch, stripped of the power and influence he once wielded. Though he left quietly, Alicia heard through contacts that his career had taken a significant hit. Knowing he would face the reality of his actions every day was enough for her. She didn't need revenge, only justice. One evening, Alicia was invited to an event at the bank to celebrate the success of the diversity program. The attendees included dozens of entrepreneurs, many of whom had received their first major loans as a result of the new policies. As she looked around the room, Alicia was struck by the diversity of faces, each reflecting a journey and a purpose. During the event, Mr. Caldwell approached her, a genuine smile on his face. "Ms. Morgan, I want to personally thank you again. This program is changing lives. I never imagined the impact one person's story could have, but here we are." Alicia smiled, a sense of fulfillment washing over her. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. This is only the beginning. I hope to see even more changes across the industry." As the night wound down, Alicia stepped outside for a moment of solitude, watching the city lights flicker against the night sky. She thought back to the beginning, to that first encounter with Peterson, to the humiliation, and to the burning determination that had propelled her forward. She hadn't set out to change the bank, to influence policies, or to become a role model. She had only wanted respect, fair treatment, and a chance to grow her business. But life had a way of transforming single acts into movements, and Alicia realized she had become part of something far greater. In the months that followed, Alicia's skincare brand expanded nationally, and she continued her advocacy work, speaking out on panels and mentoring young entrepreneurs. Her story became part of her company's legacy, a reminder to her employees and customers alike that integrity and resilience were at the heart of success. And as she looked to the future, Alicia knew she would carry this experience with her, forever reminding herself and those around her that sometimes the most powerful victories come not just from achieving personal goals, but from breaking down barriers for those who come after. She had fought for her place, and in doing so, she'd carved out a path for countless others. It was a legacy she wore proudly, knowing her actions had made an indelible mark on an industry and on the lives of people who, like her, were simply fighting for a chance to succeed.